Hi students, it's Dr. Marks and we're going to talk about good technical writing skills, and these are going to be things that you're going to want to incorporate into your data analysis projects. So I'm going to be looking to see that you're using good approaches to technical writing. Now, as I said, you're going to be developing reports as part of this class, and we want to communicate accurate statistics and use them in an appropriate way. We don't want to be misleading, right? Making wrong conclusions. And content is clearly very important, but writing quality is too. So we're going to cover some basics related to good technical writing in this lecture. We're going to start with organization and structure. Now, your report should start with some kind of overview. It should be clear where you're going. Think of this as an executive summary. So my warning is, don't just start abruptly. You need to transition into what's going on. But there's going to be some length restrictions for our projects. And that means you don't want to waste a ton of space with overly long introductions. So think of kind of an executive summary that says, the purpose of this report is to whatever, or, here's where we're going with this report. Now, the meat of your project is the following sections, right? The sections that are after that executive summary. It's not going to read like an essay where it's kind of, one long altogether flow of information. It needs to have some kind of structure, and that means section headings and sometimes section subheadings. Use bold, caps, or underlines, or combinations of these to divide up sections as needed. And usually you have a blank line before or after to offset those. Your project should end with some kind of conclusion. It could be a summary of key findings, or depending on your client's needs, it could be a recommendation for your client. Just make sure you do not end abruptly. It shouldn't have a situation where the client is reading and all of a sudden the project just ends. So just like it shouldn't start abruptly without some kind of transition in, it needs to have some kind of wrap up at the end. All right, tone and wording. Well, again, we want to communicate professionalism, right? We're working for a client, and I know you already know that. So your language doesn't have to be super, super formal, but it can't be informal, right? So if it's too super formal, it can make the report hard to read. So sounding overly technical might not meet the needs of your particular audience. So it can be conversational, but it can't be too casual. And I know you understand the difference between super casual and conversational. Now, as we said, you're writing reports for a client, so you want to consider the audience and write appropriately. Is this somebody who's well-versed in the topic and the method? If you're writing for, when I'm writing for other PhD economists, well, I can write in a more technical manner, and I know what I have to explain, and I know what I don't need to explain. So think about who your audience is, and we will describe your audience in any written assignment, the technical stuff for the data analytic work, and you can decide kind of how much do you need to convey. Now, keep your audience in mind. Clearly, you can't explain absolutely everything, right? Or the project would be wieldy, right? I mean, you just can't go on and on and on, and there's going to be length limits. So think about the average person and what they have an understanding of. They all understand means, for example, so you don't clearly want to start defining means. But we're going to assume that our client has this kind of general understanding, but they may not have a good background in statistics. That means you're going to need to explain things simply and intuitively. Remember, at the same time, you're showing the coaches who are going to be grading the work that you understand this content. Now, we're going to be writing in the third person, and can be, really challenging. We're going to be avoiding first person. So there's going to be no I did this, no we did this, this happened to us. That's all first person. Second person would be you. So you're not going to say, you see when you are looking at this. So you've got to get rid of first person and second person, write in the third person, and that is more challenging, right? So it's easier to write I analyze the patterns of absences for both female and male students, right? I analyzed, instead of saying, the patterns of absences were analyzed for both male and female students, right? That's third person. So I analyzed, or the patterns were analyzed. Now, that does lend us to passive voice. And gosh, I love passive voice. I seem to write in passive voice a lot. And I'm going to understand if you have passive voice. Third person, when you're writing reports like this, just lends itself to passive voice. And I understand that. So bottom line, it's harder to write in third person, but a lot of the times that's what's expected. So we're going to practice that. Now, obviously, we're going to have tables and figures in different reports that we work on. Your charts and graphs will be labeled as either tables or figures. And a table is going to be anything that is in chart form. So if you're listing countries that are in your data set, or you're showing a list of standardized test scores for different countries, or maybe you have descriptive statistics or regression results, which we'll be doing later, then you're going to have a table. So we call them tables. We do not call them charts. The following are examples of tables. Well, here's a table, and this is from something that we did related to a survey. And we've got another table, and you're looking at that going, oh my God, what is that? And I hope that's not part of our class. And don't worry, it's not. But those are both examples of tables. So charts, we are going to call tables. We're going to label them as tables. We're going to refer to them as tables. Then we've got figures, and figures are going to be anything that involves a pie chart or a line graph or a bar graph or other data visualization construct that we cover. It's probably best to generate your figures in Excel and then paste them into the document. And that's generally what I do. I create them in Excel and then I paste them into my Word document. So here are some examples of figures, and we've seen figures many times in this class, right? So we're looking at pie charts, line charts, bar charts, anything like that will be called a figure. All right. So we have tables and we have figures, and we label them as such. Now, charts and graphs are going to be labeled as tables and figures. Those are the only two options, and each is going to be numbered. And you can select the format that you like the best, whatever you think looks attractive and keeps things organized. But you've got to be consistent across all tables and figures. Your first table is going to be table 1, and then you're going to number from there. And then your first graph will be figure 1, and you will number from there. So it's okay if table 1 is then followed by figure 1, and then figure 2, and then figure 3, and then maybe your next table becomes table 2. So tables just start 1, 2, 3, 4. Figures start 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, a common format for numbering and titling is as follows. You can change this up. It's up to you. But I've got table 1, period, gross domestic product of China, and then I'm giving certain dates of the data that I'm reporting. Make sure that your title's descriptive enough to indicate what's being revealed. But depending on your audience and what your purpose is, you could hint at the key takeaway from the graph instead. Maybe it's table 1, falling rates of economic growth for China. So again, very different. Both would be fine. You can choose how you want to do it. You must make sure that you have not split a table or a figure across 2 pages. That is not good technical writing. So if there's not enough room on a page to fit the entire figure or table, then let the remainder of the page be blank. And then put your table or figure at the top of the next page. Now, if the table is very large, you might need to change it to landscape, turning it sideways where it sits sideways on the page. And it should still have the same formatting in terms of number and title if you decide you have to do something landscape. Now, for our purposes for this class, gang, obviously we don't want anything landscape because we can't read it when we're grading in the Canvas environment, but understand that it is an option when you're doing reports and technical writing. But the other thing I want to warn you about is that you're going to have page limits on your data analysis projects, right? I don't want a 25-page project from somebody, and we want to send a signal about the expectations. So we're going to give you a length requirement. You are not going to want to waste, half a page with a table that doesn't fit. So that might mean you want to move the placement or just shrink the table a little bit to try to see if you can make it work, or possibly change the top and bottom margin just a little bit if you think that will help you make it work. But again, you'll figure it out. Now, when you refer to your table or your figure in your paper, you need to do so by indicating the figure or table number. So consider the following example. In Figure 1, it can be seen that the standardized test scores for Virginia's public schools vary drastically from high to low. So I'm telling the reader, okay, look, I'm asking you to consider Figure 1, and from Figure 1, I'm telling you the takeaway that, look, when you look at Figure 1, you see that standardized test scores really vary from school to school to school. All right, so you can probably figure out what a figure might look like that is illustrating that kind of thing. But what I'm saying is that you have to point to the figure and you have to kind of give a takeaway. Next, you need to make sure that that in-text reference that I just gave you an example of comes before the table or the figure, right? It has to come before. That's really important, right? You don't want the reader to get to a table or a figure and not know why it's there, right? If your client's reading along and they're like, okay, wait, now there's this big table and I don't know what it's there for and it seems out of order, bad technical writing. So make sure you point to it before. But also avoid phrases like in the table below. Instead of in the table below, that's why we say in table 1. Because remember, if your pagination changes, your table could be moved to the top of the next page, and it would be kind of weird to say in the table below, but it's really at the top of the next page, right? So just say Figure 1 in Figure 1 in Table 2. The numbering system gives you an easy way to reference the table or the figure that you're talking about. So it's really very efficient giving them all a table or figure number. Now, do you see the big, bold phrase at the top? Do not orphan, do not orphan, do not orphan. It is important that you highlight for the reader the key takeaways with respect to your tables and your figures. In other words, tell the reader what the key points are related to the figure or the graph. Do not make the reader figure this out for himself or herself. That's what I mean by do not orphan your figures and tables. And I will be saying that over and over and over again. Do not orphan them. This is something I have to work really hard with undergrads because they want to throw in these, nice tables and graphics they're proud of, but they don't want to incorporate them into the paper. I know you know better. Please make sure that you incorporate the figure and table into your discussion and point to it before the reader gets to it. But remember, you don't want to repeat every number in a table. So you have to hit the highlights. And this is kind of where the art comes in, right? You have to decide how much to take away, how much to talk about, what are the takeaways? What is it that you want to say? Because if you had a big table, for example, of descriptive statistics, you cannot read every single number in that table to the reader. So pick and choose and make sure that you've not gone way overboard, but at the same time, don't do too little. If you're talking about graphs, you need to discuss any trends, any patterns. Maybe you see a range from high to low on a line that's in the graph, particular points on the graph. Maybe a certain year has a spike and you want to draw the attention to that particular year. So make sure that you're doing the same kind of thing for your graphs. So again, this is what I mean by do not orphan your tables or figures. And I'm going to expect you to do a good job with this. So here's an example. Figure 5 shows business majors' responses skewed more in favor of group work when compared to the sample of non-business majors. And then it kind of goes on and on and on. Do you see what I'm doing? One, I've got a figure 5. Notice that it has a number 5. It's got a title. It's got a legend so people can know what the dark and the light columns are. It's got labeled axes. And then I mention it before the reader gets to it, and I tell them the key takeaways related to that table. You see, I haven't gone on and on and on and on, but I've wrapped up the key information for the reader. Be certain you have not orphaned your tables and graphs. So figures and graphs must be incorporated into the paper. There must be a pointer or reference to them that alerts the reader, like Figure 1 illustrates that. You must explain the takeaways to the reader. Do not make the reader figure out the table or figure and what it says, right? Do not make the reader figure out the connection to the paper and why that figure or table is there to begin with. All right. Now, let's talk about citations of work of others. And this may not apply to much of our work, but while we're talking about good technical writing, I thought I would throw it out there because it's still important. Suppose you find a chart you like in another person's paper. Well, you've got to cite it. And if you're provided the data or provided the primary source where the data comes from, you need to go to that original source and generate your own graph. Let's talk about citations, specifically of work of others. And this is with respect to figures and tables, not citations in general. Now, when using somebody else's graph, so somebody else has a really cool graph, you want to use it, obviously you need to cite it. So if you find it in a journal article or a report with a citation, then you have to put something like this under the graph. You'd have to say, here's this graph and the source, this graph is from Jones, 1999. And then remember, Jones, 1999, well, that full citation is going to appear in your bibliography or works cited page. So again, not going to apply to our work so much, but important to understand in general that if you incorporate a graph or a table from somebody else, you have to cite it under it, and you have to put the full citation in the bibliography. If you find it online and it's not an article or a report that can be cited, now it gets a little more confusing. So you still have to cite it. You'd put something like source graph from the United States Postal Service available at www.usps.gov, whatever. You get the idea. So again, we never want to be accused of plagiarism. We do need to cite. We can incorporate the work of others as long as we are citing correctly, right? Now, if you use data reported by another source to create your own graph, then you need to make that clear as well. So as an economist, sometimes we go to the World Bank. They have some fabulous data sources, and we collect lots of data from them. All right. So I go to the database for the World Bank, and from that, I make my own graph. And when I do that, under the graph, I need to put something like this. Source. Graph generated using data available from World Bank Annual Report 2016. You see the difference there, right? Because with that language, I'm making clear that it's my own graph, but I'm still using somebody else's data and I need to give them credit. And once again, the full citation will go in the bibliography at the end of your report or your research project. Now, what if there's a study by Lair in 2014 and has a graph in it that you want to use? But here's the deal. The graph in Lair's paper says it's actually from the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. And that tells me, okay, Lair was not the creator of the graph, but I actually found it in Lair's paper. So how do we cite this if we use it in our paper? Well, we have to do something like this. Source graph is from the International Monetary Fund 2012 report on inequality as found in Lair 2014. So again, will we be using this in our class? No. But it's still a good idea to understand when and how to cite the work of others. Note that these types of indicators would appear under the table or under the graph. In some cases, you might not have a source. For example, if you're reporting data that's from a survey that you administered, do you have to cite that? No, you wouldn't cite your own survey, right? I mean, if this is a paper by me, Melanie Marks, I'm not going to say, well, this data came from Melanie Marks from her survey. Well, that would be silly, right? So obviously you wouldn't cite in that case, but anything that is not fully yours must be cited. And you don't need to cite the data set that I'm giving you. So that's one caveat. When you do your data analysis, I'm going to be giving you a data set. You do not need to cite that data set that I'm giving you. So don't worry about that. I've actually changed some numbers in it. So it's mostly real, but it's not 100% as it was when I collected the data from a school system. And so I'm not worried about you citing me. Now, let's talk about the checklist for technical writing. Does my report start with a summary or overview of some type, right? That executive summary, so that we don't just start abruptly, right? Or does it start abruptly? And if it starts abruptly, you need to fix that. Do I use headings and possibly subheadings to organize? Again, you might not necessarily need subheadings for the projects that we're doing because they're only going to be, a handful of pages long. But in reports for your own job, maybe some subheadings would be warranted. Does the order of the content make sense? And is there a flow to it? Am I writing for the intended audience? And is my tone appropriate? So I'm not too formal, not too casual. There may be times that I would want to be very formal, but for our audience, probably we want to be conversational. All right. Am I writing in third person? That's going to be the expectation for this class. Is my level of explanation appropriate for the specific person or persons that are going to be reading it? Have I given each table and figure a number and a descriptive title? Have I used a similar format for numbering and titling each figure and table throughout the paper, right? We want to be consistent. Have I used an appropriate in-text reference? In other words, I'm not orphaning, right? So that's, figure 1 shows that. So I'm pointing out, and that pointer comes before the table or graph. So does my in-text reference come before the table or graph? It should. Have I used a font in tables that matches the paper? We want consistency. We want these to look like really impressive reports. Have I accidentally split a table or figure across 2 pages? If not, if you have, we've talked about that you need to leave some blank space and move that table or figure to the next page, unless you can change your margin just a little bit or shrink the table or figure just a little bit to resolve the problem. Have I chosen an attractive and easy to read table format? Have I included appropriate labels for axes on graphs as applicable, right? If you have a line graph, it's got 2 axes and you need to make sure that those are labeled. Have I included a legend where applicable? You saw my example where I had 2 different colored bars on my graph. Well, I need to give some kind of labels, some legend to tell you which one is light gray and what is the dark gray. Are graphs easy to read and understand? They're not too complex. Have I indicated the sources related to the graph and table only if relevant, right? Do I end with a conclusion or key takeaway or set of recommendations? So again, a lot of this will be relevant for our class, but not necessarily everything. So class, some reminders. The main focus here is using and communicating about data, right? That's one of the key things we're trying to accomplish in this class. The quality of your explanations matter. It's not enough to just generate statistics. You have to be able to share them with others and help them understand them. Your ability to accurately relay information is crucial, and your ability to make intuitive and appropriate communications for your intended audience, well, that's another one of our goals. Both content and writing quality are going to matter in your reports for this class. So what you say and how you say it, we need to nail both. So let me know if you have any questions, and otherwise, thank you for listening and have a fantastic day.